The white room smelled like cleaning chemicals and fear. Kethtar sat in the chair that was too small for his large frame. His forearms kept moving even when he tried to keep them still. The doctor across from him made notes on her tablet while watching his every movement. Dr. Velnara had seen many broken soldiers before. The war with the humans had ended 3 years ago, but veterans still came to her office every day. They all had the same look in their eyes. The look of someone who had seen something that should not exist. "Tell me about New Dakota," she said, in a soft voice. "Start from the beginning." Kethtar's main arms gripped the chair arms. His smaller secondary arms twisted together in his lap. He stared at the wall behind the doctor for a long time before speaking. "We thought it would be easy," he finally said. "The humans were new to space. Their ships were small and slow. Their weapons were simple. We had beaten 17 different species before we found them. Every time it was the same. We showed up. With our fleet, they looked at our guns and they gave up. That's how war works in civilized space." The doctor nodded and kept writing. She had heard this part before from other veterans. Admiral Torvek was in charge of the invasion fleet. He told us we would be done in 2 days, maybe 3 if the humans were stupid enough to fight back. We were going to take their colony worlds first, then move on to their home planet. Simple and clean. Kethtar's voice got quieter. His hands started shaking. New Dakota was a farming world. 10 million humans living in small towns spread across 3 continents. Our scouts said they had maybe 50,000 people who could fight. No real army, no big weapons, just farmers and shop workers. He stopped talking and stared at his hands. Dr. Velnara waited. She had learned not to push too hard too fast. We came out of jump space right next to their planet. 300 ships. The biggest invasion force the Empire had ever sent against such a small target. Torvek wanted to make sure the humans understood how outmatched they were. Kethtar looked up at the doctor. His large yellow eyes were wet. They should have surrendered right away. Any smart species would have surrendered. Instead, they sent us a message, just 4 words. Captain Jake Morrison was the one who sent it. He was in charge of the planet's defense. You know what he said? Dr. Velnara shook her head. "Come and take it." The veteran's voice cracked when he said the words. He took a deep breath and continued. "We didn't understand what it meant. In our language, those words make no sense. You either fight or you don't fight. You either surrender or you resist. But humans, they don't think like normal people." Kethtar stood up and walked to the window. Outside, the capital city of the Zephyrian homeworld stretched to the horizon. Everything was clean and ordered and peaceful. Nothing like the chaos he remembered from the war. We landed troops in 12 different locations. I was with the 3rd Landing Force. We came down near a town called Millerville. Population about 50,000. We expected to find the people hiding in their houses, waiting for us to tell them what to do next. He turned back to face the doctor. The town was empty. Every building, every house, every store empty. But not like people had run away. More like they had never been there at all. No clothes left behind, no food on tables, no personal things anywhere. Like someone had taken the time to clean everything before they left. Dr. Velnara made more notes. This was new information. We should have known something was wrong right then. But we thought maybe the humans were just very organized. Some species are like that. They plan everything perfectly. So we started setting up our command post in the town center. Kethtar sat back down. His hands were shaking worse now. That's when Morrison's people hit us. Not from outside the town like we expected, from inside. They had been hiding in the buildings the whole time, in basements and tunnels and places. We never thought to look. They had been watching us set up our equipment, learning where we put our guards, figuring out our weak spots. The veteran's voice got very quiet. They didn't use normal weapons. They used things from their everyday lives, kitchen equipment, farm tools, cleaning supplies. A human woman named Amy Rodriguez killed 3 of my squad mates with something she made from a cooking pot and some chemicals from under her sink. Dr. Velnara looked up from her notes. A cooking pot? Humans call them pressure cookers. Rodriguez filled one with metal pieces and explosive chemicals. Then she hid it in a fake wall and waited for us to walk by. When it went off, it sounded like thunder. Shrapnel went everywhere. My squad leader, Jen Thari, was standing right next to it when it exploded. I found pieces of him scattered across 50 meters. Kethtar's secondary arms wrapped around his torso like he was trying to hold himself together. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that Rodriguez stayed to watch. She didn't run away after she set off the bomb. She stayed hidden in the building and watched us try to help our wounded friends. She was taking notes, learning from what she had done so she could do it better next time. The doctor put down her tablet. You saw her? We found her 3 hours later when we searched every building. She was in a closet with a notebook full of drawings. Pictures of our armor and how the explosion had damaged it. Notes about which parts of our bodies were most vulnerable. Ideas for making bigger bombs and better hiding places. Kethtar looked directly at Dr. Velnara. When we found her, she wasn't afraid. She was angry that we had interrupted her work. She kept asking questions about our equipment while we were arresting her. She wanted to know how our shields worked and what our armor was made of. Even as a prisoner, she was still trying to learn how to kill us better. The veteran stood up again and started pacing around the small room. That was when I started to understand that humans don't think about war the same way we do. For us, war is about winning and losing, about showing strength until the other side gives up. But for humans, war is about learning. Every battle teaches them something new. Every defeat shows them a weakness they can use later. He stopped pacing and faced the doctor. We held Rodriguez for 2 days before Morrison's people came to get her. They didn't try to rescue her quietly. They didn't sneak in during the night. They attacked our prison camp in broad daylight with homemade weapons and farm vehicles. Kethtar's voice got louder. 23 humans against 200 Zephyrian soldiers. They should have been slaughtered. Instead, they killed 40 of our people and rescued Rodriguez without losing a single person. Morrison led the attack himself. He drove a farming machine straight through our defensive wall while his people threw explosive bottles at our guard towers. The veteran sat down hard in his chair. That's when I learned about the human concept they call acceptable losses. For Zephyrians, every life is precious. We don't fight battles we can't win cleanly. But humans will sacrifice anything to achieve their goals. Morrison's people were ready to die to save one woman, and she was ready to die rather than give us information. Dr. Velnara picked up her tablet again. What happened to Rodriguez? She went back to making bombs, bigger ones, better ones. We found 17 more pressure cooker traps in the next week, each one more deadly than the last. She was teaching other humans how to make them, spreading her knowledge like a disease. Kethtar closed his large yellow eyes. That was just the first week of a war that lasted 3 years, and Rodriguez was just one human on one small farming world. Morrison had thousands more just like her, all of them learning, all of them adapting, all of them ready to die for reasons we could never understand. The room was quiet except for the sound of the doctor's stylus on her tablet. We eventually took New Dakota, Kethtar said without opening his eyes. It took us 6 months instead of 2 days. We lost 12,000 soldiers. The humans lost their entire population. But they never stopped fighting. Even when Morrison was killed in the final battle, his people kept fighting. They had recorded his voice giving orders, and they played it over their radio system to coordinate attacks even after he was dead. Dr. Velnara looked at her notes. The session had lasted 2 hours, but it felt like minutes. That's enough for today, she said gently. We'll continue next week. Kethtar opened his eyes and nodded. As he walked toward the door, he stopped and looked back at the doctor. New Dakota was supposed to be the easy part of the war, he said. If I tell you about what came after, you might need therapy too. Then he left, and Dr. Velnara was alone, with her notes and the smell of fear that still lingered in the air. Dr. Velnara noticed that Kethtar looked worse than last week. The veteran's forearms shook constantly now, and his yellow eyes kept darting toward the door like he wanted to run away. But he came back every week, just like the other survivors. They all needed to tell their stories, even when the memories hurt. You mentioned that New Dakota was just the beginning, the doctor said softly. What happened after you took the colony? Kethtar stared at his hands for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. We thought we had won. Something important. Admiral Torvik told us that crushing the human colony would break their spirit. He said they would see how powerful we were and surrender their other worlds without a fight. That's how it always worked before. The veteran looked up at Dr. Velnara with haunted eyes. We were so wrong. Taking New Dakota didn't break the humans. It taught them things, terrible things, and they used what they learned to become something we had never seen before. Kethtar stood up and walked to the window again. It was his habit now, pacing when the memories became too much to bear sitting still. The humans had lost 3 colony worlds in the first month of the war. Their main fleet was scattered and running. By every rule of civilized warfare, they should have retreated to their home system and prepared for a final battle. That's what any smart species would do. He turned back to face the doctor. Instead, they did something that made no sense. They went on the attack. While they were losing. While their people were dying. They started hunting our supply ships and attacking our bases. It was like they had gone insane. Dr. Velnara made notes while listening. She had heard similar stories from other veterans, but each one added new details that made the human war machine seem more frightening. The human commander was a man named Colonel Pete Sullivan. Intelligence said he had been a cargo ship captain before the war started. Just a man who moved goods from one planet to another. Nothing special about him. But when the war began, something changed in Sullivan. Kethtar's voice got stronger as he remembered the enemy who had haunted his nightmares. Sullivan took the remains of 3 defeated human fleets and turned them into ghosts. His ships would appear out of nowhere, attack our convoys, then disappear before we could respond. We never knew where he would strike next. The veteran sat back down, but his hands kept moving restlessly. At first, we thought it was just normal, hit-and-run tactics. Every species tries that when they're losing. But Sullivan wasn't just attacking randomly. He was learning our patrol routes, our supply schedules, our communication codes. Every attack taught him something new about how we operated. Kethtar's secondary arms wrapped around his torso again. The worst part was that Sullivan's people started changing their ships in ways that violated every rule of space combat. Captain Lisa Turner commanded a vessel called the UES Defiance. It had been crippled in battle, engines destroyed, weapons offline. Any civilized crew would have surrendered. Dr. Velnara looked up from her notes. What did they do instead? Turner ordered her crew to remove all the safety systems from their fusion reactor. She was going to turn her entire ship into a bomb. Not just any bomb, but one that would burn as hot as a small star. The veteran's voice cracked with emotion. I was on the battleship Eternal Victory when Turner made her final run. She came at us in a ship that was barely holding together, trailing, atmosphere and debris. Admiral Zektos was laughing. He said the humans had finally learned their place. Kethtar closed his eyes, but the memories played behind his eyelids anyway. Turner's ship was moving slowly like a wounded animal. Our gunners had plenty of time to target it. But something felt wrong. The human ship wasn't trying to dodge our weapons. It was flying straight toward our flagship like it wanted to be. Hit. The veteran opened his eyes and looked directly at the doctor. That's when I understood what Turner was planning. She wasn't trying to escape or fight back. She was trying to get as close as possible before her reactor exploded. I started screaming warnings over the communication system, but it was too late. Kethtar stood up again and began pacing faster. The Defiance rammed our flagship at full speed. For just a moment, nothing happened. Then Turner's jury-rigged reactor went critical. The explosion lit up space for millions of kilometers. It was like watching a new sun being born. The veteran stopped pacing and gripped the back of his chair. 47 ships were destroyed in that explosion. 47 ships and over 200,000 Zephyrian lives. All destroyed by one human woman who decided that taking us with her was worth more than living. Dr. Velnara put down her tablet. The numbers were staggering. Turner's sacrifice should have been the end of Sullivan's fleet, but instead of retreating, the remaining human ships became even more aggressive. It was like Turner's death had infected them with madness. Kethtar sat down heavily. That's when we encountered the human they called Danny Wright. He was an engineer on one of Sullivan's remaining ships. Before the war, Wright had repaired civilian equipment, air recyclers, water purifiers, simple things. But the war changed him into something else. The veteran's hands started shaking again. Wright had a talent for taking our own technology and turning it against us. Every piece of Zephyrian equipment that fell into human hands became a weapon in Wright's hands. He would study our devices for hours, learning how they worked, then modify them in ways that would cause maximum damage to our forces. Dr. Velnara leaned forward. This was new information that hadn't appeared in any official reports. Wright turned our communication arrays into electromagnetic pulse weapons that could disable entire squadrons. He modified our medical scanners to emit frequencies that caused seizures in Zephyrian nervous systems. Our own supply containers became bombs that would explode when opened. Kethtar's voice got quieter and more frightened. But the worst thing Wright did was with our captured soldiers. When Sullivan's people took prisoners, Wright would interview them, not to get information about our fleet movements or battle plans. He wanted to know about our equipment, how it worked, what it was made of, what would happen if it was changed. The veteran looked directly at Dr. Velnara. Wright was learning how to make our own armor kill us. He found ways to make the power cells overload. He discovered chemicals that would make the metal brittle and weak. He figured out how to hack the life support systems and turn them into poison gas dispensers. Kethtar stood up and walked to the far corner of the room. We found Wright's workshop after Sullivan's main base was finally overrun. It looked like a madman's laboratory. Pieces of Zephyrian equipment everywhere. All of them modified and changed and twisted into things they were never meant to be. The veteran's voice became barely audible. Wright had been keeping detailed notes about everything he learned. Hundreds of pages of diagrams and formulas and test results. But the most frightening thing was his journal. Wright wrote down his thoughts about each experiment, his feelings about turning our technology against us. Dr. Velnara waited for Kethtar to continue. Wright wasn't angry about the war. He wasn't seeking revenge for human deaths. He was curious. He wrote about our equipment like a scientist studying interesting specimens. He was fascinated by the challenge of making our own tools betray us. Kethtar turned back to face the doctor. In his final journal entry, Wright thanked us. He said that fighting Zephyrians had taught him more about engineering in 2 years than he had learned in his entire previous career. He was grateful for the learning opportunity. The veteran sat down again, looking exhausted. Wright died when we finally took Sullivan's base. But by then, he had trained dozens of other human engineers. His knowledge spread through their remaining fleet like a virus. Every human ship became a mobile laboratory where our captured technology was studied and perverted. Kethtar looked out the window at the peaceful city beyond. Sullivan's fleet was finally destroyed 6 months later, but the humans had learned everything they needed to know about fighting us. Wright's modifications and Turner's sacrifice tactics spread to every human military unit. What had started as desperate improvisation became standard human warfare doctrine. The veteran closed his eyes. We didn't realize it at the time, but Sullivan and his people had been teaching the entire human species how to fight against superior technology. Every battle, every defeat, every small victory added to their knowledge. They were turning the war into a classroom. Dr. Velnara looked at her notes. The session had revealed disturbing new information about human adaptability and learning capacity. By the time we destroyed Sullivan's last ship, the humans had already moved on to the next phase of their war plan. What we thought was victory was really just graduation day. Kethtar opened his eyes and looked at the doctor. Next week, I'll tell you about what the humans did when they stopped pretending to fight fair, about the things that made even our bravest warriors refuse to leave their ships. As the veteran left the office, Dr. Velnara stared at her notes for a long time. Each session revealed new layers of human tactical thinking that seemed designed to exploit psychological weaknesses, rather than just military ones. Outside her window, construction crews worked on a new cultural center, where humans and Zephyrians would study together. Dr. Velnara had been treating war veterans for 5 years, but she had never seen one shake like Kethtar did when he entered her office for the 3rd session. The alien veteran's forearms moved in different directions, like they belonged to separate people. His yellow eyes were bloodshot and kept looking at empty spaces in the room. "Did you sleep at all this week?" she asked gently. Kethtar made a sound that might have been laughter, but it came out wrong, bitter and broken. "Sleep," Brings dreams. Dreams bring memories. I haven't slept properly since the Battle of Titan Station. That was 2 years ago. The doctor made a note about prescribing stronger sleep medication. But she knew from experience that drugs rarely helped veterans who had fought humans. Their nightmares were too specific, too detailed, too real. "Tell me about Titan Station," she said. Kethtar walked to his usual spot by the window. Outside, the morning sun made the city look clean and safe. Nothing like the places where he had learned to fear humanity. Titan Station was a human mining facility orbiting Saturn, important strategic location. Good place to refuel ships and repair equipment. High Command decided we needed to take it to cut off human supply lines in that sector. The veteran's voice was steady at first, like he was reading from a military report. Intelligence said the station had about 5,000 people. Mix of miners, engineers, and security guards. Maybe 300 trained fighters at most. We sent a full battle group, 12 ships, 8,000 Marines. It should have been easy. Kethtar turned away from the window. The human commander was Major Rick Barnes, career military officer, served in several small conflicts before the big war started. Good record, smart tactics, nothing unusual. Just another human soldier doing his job. Dr. Velnara noticed that Kethtar's hands had stopped shaking when he talked about the initial situation. It was when he got to the actual fighting that the tremors started. We demanded surrender as soon as we arrived. Standard procedure. Give the civilians a chance to avoid bloodshed. Barnes sent back a 2-word message. Negative, Ghost Rider. We didn't understand what it meant, but the tone was clear enough. The veteran sat down in his chair but immediately stood up again. Assault began at 0800 station time. Our Marines landed in 4 different docking bays while our ships bombarded their defensive positions. Everything went according to plan for the first 6 hours. We pushed the humans back through 3 levels of the station. Barnes was leading the retreat personally, calling out orders and organizing his people. Kethtar began pacing around the small room. That's when everything changed. A Zephyrian sniper got lucky and hit Barnes with a plasma bolt. Chest shot, burned right through his armor. He went down hard and didn't get back up. His second-in-command, Sergeant Katie Walsh, dragged him to safety while the other humans provided cover fire. The veteran stopped pacing and gripped the back of his chair. In any normal species, losing the commanding officer breaks unit cohesion. Soldiers start thinking about their own survival instead of the mission. Some try to surrender. Others retreat to safe positions. It's basic military psychology. Remove the leader and the group falls apart. Dr. Velnara looked up from her notes. But the humans didn't fall apart? Kethtar's laugh came out broken again. They became more dangerous. Not less dangerous. More. It was like shooting Barnes had awakened something sleeping in every human on that station. Walsh took command and ordered a fighting retreat that turned into the costliest victory in Zephyrian military history. The veteran sat down heavily and put his head in his primary hands. I was with the 4th Marine Unit pushing through the industrial section. We had been making steady progress, taking corridor after corridor. The humans were falling back in good order, making us pay for every meter, but falling back. Then, word came over the radio that Barnes was down. Kethtar looked up at the doctor with haunted eyes. The humans stopped retreating. They didn't just hold their positions. They came at us. All of them, at the same time, like someone had flipped a switch in their brains. The veteran's secondary arms wrapped around his torso. But it wasn't random aggression. It was coordinated madness. The humans created what they called a casualty chain. Every injured human became the center of a protective formation that moved through the station like a living organism. Dr. Velnara put down her tablet. This was completely different from any military behavior she had studied. Corporal Ben Hayes was carrying the wounded Barnes through 6 kilometers of combat zone. Hayes had taken shrapnel in his leg and was bleeding badly, but he kept moving. When Hayes finally collapsed from blood loss, Private Nicole Foster picked up Barnes and continued the evacuation. Kethtar's voice got quieter and more frightened. When Foster was shot in the shoulder, someone else took over. Then someone else. The humans created a relay system where protecting their wounded became more important than protecting themselves. Each human who fell made the others fight harder, not weaker. The veteran stood up and began pacing again, faster this time. I watched a human medic named Sam Porter treat Barnes under direct fire. Porter had set up a field medical station in a storage room while battle raged in the corridors outside. Plasma bolts were burning through the walls, but Porter kept working. Kethtar stopped pacing and faced the doctor directly. When my unit surrounded Porter's position, he had a choice. Surrender and let us capture Barnes, or fight hopeless odds with medical equipment. Porter chose option 3. He rigged the station's oxygen tanks into improvised explosives. Dr. Velnara felt a chill run down her spine. Porter turned his medical station into a bomb. Not to kill us, though that would have been a bonus. He did it to clear enough space to continue treating Barnes. The explosion killed 12 of my squad mates and blew a hole in the station hull, but Porter was back to work on his patient before the smoke cleared. The veteran's hands were shaking violently now. That's when I understood that humans don't just fight for territory or resources or even survival. They fight for each other with an intensity that borders on religious mania. Every wounded human doesn't weaken their unit. It creates a focal point that makes everyone else more lethal. Kethtar walked back to the window and pressed his forehead against the cool glass. We took Titan Station eventually. It cost us 4,000 Marines and 2 ships. The humans lost everyone except Barnes, who survived thanks to Porter's field surgery. But that wasn't the worst part. Dr. Velnara waited for him to continue. The worst part was what the humans did in the final hour. When it became clear they couldn't hold the station, they didn't try to escape. They didn't surrender to save civilian lives. They turned the entire mining facility into a weapon. The veteran's voice became barely audible. The humans had been sabotaging their own equipment during the retreat. Every piece of mining machinery, every power generator, every life support system had been rigged with explosive charges. When Walsh gave the final order, the entire station began to self-destruct in sequence. Kethtar turned back to face the doctor. We had 15 minutes to evacuate 4,000 Marines and 8,000 human civilians from a station that was tearing itself apart. The humans could have triggered the explosions while we were still aboard. They could have killed everyone, including themselves. Instead, they gave us time to get people out. Dr. Velnara looked confused. That sounds almost merciful. Kethtar's bitter laugh filled the small room. That's what made it so terrifying. The humans weren't being merciful. They were being efficient. Walsh had calculated exactly how much time we needed to evacuate. She gave us just enough time to save lives, but not enough time to save any equipment or supplies. The veteran sat down again. The humans destroyed millions of credits worth of mining equipment and strategic materials. But they did it in a way that showed they valued life over everything else. Even enemy life. Even our lives. Kethtar looked directly at Dr. Velnara. Gray, you understand how frightening that is? To fight an enemy that cares more about protecting the wounded than winning battles? To face soldiers who become more dangerous when their friends are hurt? To realize that human mercy might be more terrifying than human cruelty? The veteran closed his eyes. Barnes survived his wounds and returned to active duty 3 months later. Porter was awarded some kind of human medal for his medical work, under fire. Walsh was promoted to major and given command of her own unit. The humans turned their defeat at Titan Station into a training manual for the rest of their military. Dr. Velnara looked at her notes. Every session revealed new aspects of human psychology that seemed designed to exploit the most basic assumptions about rational behavior. After Titan Station, we started seeing the same patterns everywhere humans fought. Units that became more cohesive under pressure. Soldiers who fought harder when their friends were wounded. Medical personnel who turned hospitals into fortresses and healing into a form of warfare. Kethtar opened his eyes. The humans had weaponized their own compassion. They turned caring for each other into a tactical advantage that we couldn't counter with bigger guns or better armor. How do you fight? An enemy whose greatest weakness is also their greatest strength? The veteran stood up to leave. Dr. Velnara arrived at her office early that morning to find Kethtar already waiting outside her door. The veteran looked like he hadn't slept in days. His forearms hung limply at his sides, and his yellow eyes stared at nothing. When she Unlocked the door, he followed her inside without speaking. "You're early today," she said softly. Kethtar sat in his usual chair and looked out the window. The morning sun cast long shadows across the city, but he seemed to be seeing something else entirely. "I've been thinking about Admiral Grace Kelly all night," he said in a hollow voice. "About what she did to end the war, about what it means that humans are capable of such things." Dr. Vel Nara had never heard that name before. In all her sessions with veterans, no one had mentioned an Admiral Kelly. "Tell me about her," she said. Kethtar was quiet for so long that the doctor wondered if he had heard her question. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. "Kelly commanded the human home fleet when we finally decided to end the war with overwhelming force. High Command had assembled the largest battle armada in galactic history. 2,000 ships. The pride of the Zephyrian Empire. We were going to destroy Earth itself and show the galaxy what happened to species that defied us." The veteran's hands began their familiar trembling. Intelligence said Earth's defenses were strong, but conventional. Orbital platforms, defense satellites, maybe 500 human ships. We expected a hard fight, but we had 4 times their numbers and better technology. Admiral Torvek was confident we could break their resistance in a few days. Kethtar turned to face the doctor. What we found waiting for us was something that shouldn't exist. Grace Kelly had spent 6 months preparing Earth's defenses, but not in any way we expected. Instead of building bigger guns or stronger shields, she had prepared what humans call the nuclear option. Dr. Vel Nara leaned forward. This was completely new information. Kelly wasn't planning to fight a normal space battle. She was planning to use Earth's moon as a weapon, not weapons mounted on the moon itself. The veteran stood up and walked to the window, but his reflection looked like a stranger. Chief Constructor Alex Morgan had spent months installing massive gravitational manipulators on the moon's surface, equipment that could alter orbital mechanics. When our fleet arrived in Earth's solar system, we found the moon moving in ways that violated physics. Kethatar's voice got stronger as he remembered the impossible thing he had witnessed. "Kelly sent us a message as we approached Earth, just 3 words. Catch this, jerks." Then she fired the moon at our fleet like it was a missile. Dr. Vel Nara put down her tablet. The implications were staggering. A moon masses billions of tons. Moving at orbital velocity, it becomes the largest kinetic weapon ever created. Our fleet had to choose between being destroyed by impact or destroying Earth's moon to save ourselves. The veteran turned back to face the doctor. "Admiral Torvek ordered all ships to target the moon with everything we had. It took the combined firepower of 2,000 ships firing continuously for 3 hours to break it apart. By the time we finished, there was nothing left but a massive debris field stretching across millions of kilometers." Kethtar sat down heavily. "We thought we had prevented disaster. We thought Kelly had made a desperate gamble and lost. Then the debris started moving in patterns that made no sense. Pieces of the destroyed moon were changing course, accelerating, forming up into attack formations. The veteran's secondary arms wrapped around his torso. Kelly had been hiding her ships inside the moon, not on the surface. Inside, Morgan's construction teams had hollowed out huge chambers and hidden the entire human fleet in the moon's core. When we destroyed their hiding place, we released them directly into the middle of our formation." Dr. Vel Nara felt her own hand starting to shake. Commander Tony Martinez led squadrons of fighters that had been disguised as lunar debris. They struck our fleet from inside our own defensive perimeter. Our ships were so tightly packed that we couldn't fire back without hitting our own forces. Kethtar's voice became hollow and distant, but the moon gambit was just a distraction. While we were dealing with Martinez's fighters and the debris field, Kelly's real weapon was already active, something called Protocol Geneva Convention Workaround. The veteran looked directly at the doctor. Chief Science Officer Dr. Helen Cook had weaponized mathematics. She had calculated the exact frequency needed to disrupt Zephyrian brain patterns and was broadcasting it through every communication channel simultaneously. Dr. Vel Nara had never heard of sonic weapons being used on that scale. It wasn't lethal, but it caused severe disorientation and nausea in every Zephyrian within range. Our pilots couldn't fly straight. Our gunners couldn't aim properly. Our communications officers couldn't understand their own equipment. Kethtar closed his eyes. Cook had turned our own surrender broadcasts into a weapon. Every time we tried to contact our ships, the mathematical frequency buried in the signal made our crews sicker. The humans had made it literally painful for us to coordinate our attack. The veteran opened his eyes and stared at the ceiling. We were fighting an enemy that had turned physics itself into a weapon. They had militarized orbital mechanics, mathematics, and basic communication theory. Things that shouldn't be weaponizable. Dr. Velnara looked at her notes. Nothing in her training had prepared her for this level of tactical innovation. The battle lasted 18 hours. We lost over 400 ships before Admiral Torvik ordered a retreat, but Kelly wasn't finished with us yet. As our fleet pulled back, she sent another message. Kethtar's voice cracked with emotion. Kelly thanked us for the learning experience. She said fighting the Zephyrian Empire had taught humanity valuable lessons about large-scale warfare. Then she offered to share what they had learned with any other species interested in mutual defense agreements. The veteran stood up and began pacing frantically. Do you understand what that means? We had just lost 400 ships to tactics that violated every principle of civilized warfare, and Kelly was offering to teach other species how to fight us. She was turning our defeat into a recruitment opportunity. Kethtar stopped pacing and gripped the back of his chair. But the most terrifying part came 3 days later. While our fleet was regrouping outside Earth's solar system, we received detailed technical specifications for everything the humans had used against us. Blueprints for the gravitational manipulators, formulas for the sonic weapons. Complete construction plans for hiding fleets inside planetary bodies. Dr. Velnara looked up from her notes in shock. Kelly sent us our own defeat as a gift, with a note explaining that sharing knowledge was the human way of building lasting peace. She wanted us to understand exactly how we had been beaten, so we could appreciate the effort that had gone into it. The veteran's laugh came out broken and bitter. The humans had been treating the entire war as a learning exercise. Every battle, every defeat, every victory was just data to be analyzed and improved upon. Kelly's message included suggestions for how we could improve our own tactics to make future conflicts more interesting. Kethtar walked back to the window. That's when High Command realized we weren't fighting a normal enemy. We were fighting a species that viewed warfare as a form of education. Every time we thought we had gained an advantage, the humans learned something new that made them more dangerous. The veteran pressed his forehead against the glass. Kelly's final message was an invitation to peace negotiations. But it wasn't a surrender or a plea for mercy. It was a job offer. She wanted to hire the Zephyrian Empire as training partners to help humanity prepare for whatever threats they might face in the future. Dr. Velnara felt a chill run down her spine. The humans had defeated the largest fleet in galactic history, using improvised weapons and impossible tactics. Then they offered to teach us how they did it. They turned our humiliation into a business proposal. Kethtar turned back to face the doctor. Admiral Torvik accepted Kelly's offer 3 weeks later, not because we wanted peace, but because we were terrified of what humans might do if they got bored and started looking for new enemies to practice on. The veteran sat down and looked at his shaking hands. Kelly personally flew to our flagship for the treaty signing. She brought gifts for the crew: human food, cultural artifacts, children's drawings showing Zephyrians and humans working together. She acted like we were old friends meeting after a friendly competition. Kethtar's voice became barely audible. During the ceremony, Kelly mentioned something called Protocol Lazarus in passing. She said it was something they probably wouldn't need now that we were friends. When Admiral Torvik asked for details, Kelly smiled and said it was just human tendency to over-prepare. The veteran looked up at the doctor. Later intelligence revealed that Protocol Lazarus was humanity's plan to upload human consciousness into self-replicating machines if Earth was destroyed. They were prepared to become digital ghosts that would spend eternity making life difficult for whoever killed them. Dr. Velnara's tablet slipped from her hands. The humans had been fighting with one hand tied behind their backs. Kelly's moon weapon and sonic broadcasts were just the conventional options. Dr. Velnara had been dreading this final session for weeks. Kethtar looked worse each time she saw him, and today he appeared to be barely holding himself together. His 4 arms moved constantly, like he was trying to ward off invisible attackers. His yellow eyes darted around the room, never settling on anything for more than a few seconds. "This is our last scheduled session," she said gently. "How are you feeling about that?" Kethtar made a sound that might have been laughter, but it came out as more of a sob. Relieved. Terrified. "I don't know anymore. Talking about the war helps, but it also makes the nightmares worse. Every time I tell these stories, I remember new details. Things I had buried in my mind come floating back to the surface." He walked to the window and stared out at the peaceful city below. "You want me to tell you about the peace treaty, about Ambassador Carol Stevens and why human friendship scares me more than human warfare ever did. But I'm not sure you're ready to hear it." Dr. Velnara had treated hundreds of veterans over the years. She thought she was ready for anything. "Tell me about the treaty negotiations," she said. Kethtar was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was flat and emotionless, like he was reading from a report. The ceasefire was signed 3 weeks after the Battle of Earth. Admiral Torvek had lost almost half his fleet, and High Command realized that continuing the war would only teach humans new ways to kill us. We agreed to meet at a neutral space station to discuss terms. The veteran turned away from the window. "We expected the negotiations to be difficult. Humans had every right to demand heavy reparations and territorial concessions. They had defeated the largest invasion force in galactic history, using improvised weapons and impossible tactics. By all rights, they should have been dictating terms to us." Kethtar sat down in his chair, but immediately stood up again. The human peace negotiator was Ambassador Carol Stevens, former military officer who had lost 3 sons in the war. Intelligence said she hated Zephyrians and would probably demand harsh punishments for the Empire. We prepared for the worst. Dr. Velnara noticed that Kethtar's hands had stopped shaking when he talked about expectations, but they started trembling again when he mentioned Stevens. Stevens arrived at the peace conference with a delegation of 50 humans, scientists, engineers, artists, teachers, even children. She said she wanted the negotiations to represent all aspects of human society, not just the military. The veteran began pacing around the room. The first thing Stevens did was present gifts to the Zephyrian delegation, handcrafted items made by human artisans, pottery, paintings, sculptures, music recordings, personal items that took time and care to create. Kethtar stopped pacing and faced the doctor. One of the gifts was a painting made by Stevens' youngest daughter. It showed human and Zephyrian children playing together in a garden. The little girl had never seen a Zephyrian before, but she painted us as friends. Stevens said her daughter was excited to meet real Zephyrians someday. Dr. Velnara made notes while listening. This behavior seemed completely contrary to what she would expect from a war-traumatized parent. Stevens opened the negotiations by thanking us. She said the war had been a valuable learning experience for humanity, and that fighting the Zephyrian Empire had taught them important lessons about large-scale conflict management. The veteran's voice cracked with emotion. She thanked us for teaching humans about advanced space warfare. She thanked us for showing them the importance of supply line protection. She thanked us for demonstrating how different species approach tactical problems. Kethtar walked back to the window. Stevens said humanity had learned more about engineering, physics, and military strategy in 3 years of war than they had in the previous 50 years of peace. She called it an accelerated education program. Dr. Velnara looked up from her notes in confusion. Stevens presented detailed proposals for post-war cooperation, technology exchanges, joint research projects, cultural exchange programs, shared exploration missions. She had plans for turning former enemies into partners in ways that would benefit both species. The veteran's hands were shaking violently now. But the most terrifying thing was how casual Stevens was about human capabilities. During a break in negotiations, she mentioned something called Protocol Lazarus, just in passing, like she was talking about the weather. Kethtar turned back to face the doctor. When Admiral Torvek asked about it, Stevens smiled and said it was just human tendency to over-prepare. She explained that if Earth had been destroyed, they had plans to upload human consciousness into self-replicating machines scattered throughout the galaxy. Dr. Velnara felt her blood run cold. Stevens described it like a contingency plan for a business meeting. She said the uploaded humans would have spent eternity making life difficult for whoever killed them. But since we were all friends now, it was probably unnecessary. The veteran sat down heavily. Stevens had dozens of similar protocols, plans for turning asteroids into kinetic weapons, techniques for modifying stellar radiation to disrupt enemy communications, methods for seeding enemy worlds with self-replicating nanobots that would slowly convert the environment to be more suitable for human life. Kethtar looked directly at the doctor. She talked about planet-killing weapons like they were homework assignments her students had turned in, casual references to technologies that could reshape solar systems or eliminate entire species. All delivered with a smile and offers to share the information. Dr. Velnara's tablet was shaking in her hands. The peace treaty was signed 6 months later. But it wasn't really a treaty between equals. It was humanity offering to teach the galaxy how to defend itself against threats like them. They turned peace into a recruitment program. The veteran stood up and began pacing frantically. Stevens established the Interspecies Defense Academy 3 years ago. Human and alien students learn together. The curriculum includes everything from basic strategy to advanced physics manipulation. Humans teach other species how to fight wars, the human way. Kethtar stopped pacing and gripped the back of his chair. But the truly terrifying thing is that humans seem genuinely happy about the peace. They're not pretending to be friendly while planning revenge. They're actually excited about working with former enemies. The veteran's voice became barely audible. Stevens sent me a personal message last month. She invited me to lecture at the Defense Academy about Zephyrian military doctrine. She said my experiences during the war would be valuable teaching material for future students. Dr. Velnara put down her tablet. Stevens wants me to help train the next generation of human military officers. She thinks my perspective as a former enemy would give students insights they couldn't get from human instructors. Kethtar walked to the far corner of the room. Don't you understand what that means? The humans are so confident in their abilities that they want former enemies to help improve their military education. They're not afraid of us learning their secrets because they know we'll never be able to use that knowledge against them. The veteran turned back to face the doctor. Human peace is more terrifying than human war because it shows supreme confidence. They're not making friends because they're weak or desperate. They're making friends because they know they're strong enough to handle any betrayal. Kethtar sat down and looked at his shaking hands. I drive past the new cultural center every day on my way to these sessions. Human and Zephyrian children play together in the courtyard. Their teachers are working on joint curriculum projects. Everyone looks happy and peaceful. The veteran looked up at Dr. Velnara. But I watch those human children and wonder what they're really learning. What games are they teaching our cubs? What songs are they singing? What stories are they sharing about the war? Kethtar's voice became a whisper. Stevens included something in her latest message that keeps me awake at night. She said her daughter, the one who painted that picture of human and Zephyrian children playing together, is now old enough to attend the Defense Academy. The veteran closed his eyes. Stevens said her daughter is excited to study military history with Zephyrian students. She wants to learn about our perspective on the war. She thinks it will help her understand how to be a better friend to alien species. Kethtar opened his eyes and looked directly at the doctor. A human child who grew up during the war, whose mother defeated the largest fleet in galactic history, wants to learn from us how to be better friends. She's not afraid of us. She's curious about us. The veteran stood up to leave. That's why I can't sleep. Not because humans are our enemies, but because they're our friends. And human friendship is more dangerous than human hatred because it comes from a position of absolute strength. As Kethtar walked toward the door, he paused and looked back. Stevens's daughter sent me a message too. She thanked me for fighting honorably during the war and said she hopes to meet me someday. She signed it, "Your student in peace, Emily Stevens." The veteran opened the door. I keep thinking about that little girl who painted pictures of alien friends before she ever met one. Now she's grown up and wants to study warfare with those same aliens. The humans are raising a generation that sees former enemies as potential teachers. Kethtar stepped into the hallway.